Are you sharing?
Sharing time with Deputy Coppinger.
15 minutes between you, yep.
7.5 each, is it?
It's fine.
Minister, there's nothing I would like more than to believe that this plan was going to deliver. I do think everybody in this House wants to solve the problem. How could they not? Given the scale of hardship and suffering that people who are homeless in emergency accommodation or who are waiting on housing lists for 15 to 18 years with really little or no hope of ever being housed. How could you not want to solve this problem? And I do believe, setting aside everything else I'm going to say in a minute, that everybody wants to solve the problem. But I don't think, when you look at the detail of this plan, as I haven't read every word, but I've read it pretty closely, that this is going to deliver. And I think it won't deliver, really, because it doesn't take on board not just what people like ourselves have been saying since 2011, but what was confirmed by the chairperson of the Housing Finance Agency this morning, when she summed up, really, and summarised what we've been saying for 5 years. And I think it stands as the most accurate critique of what isn't in this. The failure of this plan to actually get to the kernel of the problem. She said, we have become too dependent on the private sector to house low-income households. If we are going to deliver houses, we need, in the short term, in my view, local authorities to be reintroduced to building at a large scale that will involve them having permission to borrow money. So the local authorities must directly deliver council housing, and be allowed to borrow, given the money, to do it directly themselves. She recognises the problem, and she's right. Now, the question is this plan proposing to do that? And it's not. It is littered with references to incentives, to private developers, to vulture funds, to competitiveness. It doesn't mention the vulture funds specifically, but it talks about big land, those who will build in large-scale rental property. That's the vulture funds. That is the vulture funds. The people who own the land, who bought up the land, who bought up the property. And the most telling confirmation that my assessment of this is right was when I asked the Taoiseach today, could he tell me how many council houses, local authority houses, would be built under the plan? And he admitted, frankly, he couldn't give me an answer to that question. And it's not in the plan, Minister. I've heard since, I presume coming from you, from journalists who I suspect, like everybody else, want to believe this plan is a new departure, because everybody really does want to believe it is a new departure. Like we all wanted to believe that Anne Kelly's plan was going to change things, but didn't. But he couldn't answer the question, and this report doesn't answer the question. How many council houses? And the nearest it gets to answering it is on page 45, where it says, with cooperation and mobilisation by local authorities and AHBs, the action plan envisages a significant progressive increase in social housing build activity to over 5,000 homes a year by 2021. Now, let's read that carefully. So it's not 5,000 a year to 2021, which would still only amount to 25,000, and it wouldn't all be council, because some of it would be approved housing bodies, but you hope to get up to 5,000 in 2021. Right? So of the headline figure of 47,000, which sounds good, social housing units, less than 25,000, in fact I suspect it's very considerably less than 25,000, will be actual council houses, local authority houses. Now when you consider that in the time of the last government, the housing list has gone from 96,000 to, we don't quite know what it is now, I think 140,000 families and households, up by over 45,000. If the rate of increase in the housing list continues, we will have a longer council housing list at the end of this plan than we now have. Because this plan does not envisage, at the centre of its strategy, the local authorities taking the advice of the Housing Finance Agency and getting back to the direct provision of local authority housing in large scale, as she says. And it doesn't. Well, why are the figures not in it? And even now, can you tell me how many council houses? How many council houses, Minister? The Taoiseach couldn't answer, and I bet you can't. Yeah.
Not questions. Continue.
Yeah. And no. Gino Kenny showed up, and it isn't in the report, Minister. Right? It is not in the report. And the bulk of it is HAPS and RAS. Now, Minister, again, for the desperate people coming into my office on a daily basis, I disagree fundamentally with the principle of HAPS, but I'd like to think for the desperate people coming in, at least I could say, well, there you go. It's not a council house, but it's something. But I can tell you it's not going to happen. The numbers, you might get some of it, but you won't get anything like the targets that you're talking about, Minister. Why would they sign up? There's no evidence that they're signing up in significant numbers. Why would they? They're not. They're not. Maria, I know from my own locality. They are not. I mean, I read these figures out the other day, Minister, and let me do it again. Even with your increased rent caps or your HAP limits, rent levels in Dunleary Rathdown for a single one-bedroom are 1,800. Double your limits. Why would a private landlord enter into an arrangement with you for a cap of 1,300 when average rents are 1,800? Why would, for a three-bedroom, would they enter into an arrangement with you when the average is 2,200 and all they can get off you is 1,300? Why would they do it? They will not do it, Minister. And that is the problem. I haven't got time, sadly, to go into the detail, as so is often the case. The reliance on the private sector, the ideological blindness, the kowtowing to the developers and them telling you we can't make enough profits, that's why we won't build and deliver the social housing or the affordable housing, and we keep kowtowing to them and they still don't deliver, and we don't get the social housing, the council housing that we actually need to solve the problem.
Thank you. Deputy Coppinger.
I just gave them to you.
Just
build council
7
houses.
Minutes, Deputy. Without interruption, please. Deputy Coppinger, you have just 7 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Minister, I've put this to you before. We are in the midst of the biggest housing crisis that this state has ever seen. And your plan today proposes yet more focus on private developers to resolve this, the same market that caused the problem in the first place. But now you've introduced a new element, or you've made it crystal clear, that public land, the most precious way we have of resolving the housing crisis right now, is to be gifted by councils to these private developers. An absolutely incredible thing to do in the midst of a housing crisis, up to 75%. So, as well as money up front for Part 5s and a range of other rewards, you never listen to anything we have to say, but would you listen to the CEO of NAMA? Because what he talked about, he said it's not that housing is not profitable for private developers, it's just not profitable enough. That they are sitting, €20,000 profit apparently isn't enough for them. So what you're proposing to do is now reward them for their hoarding and their strike of capital that they've been engaged in. But this time given over local authority land. Just to start with the poverty of ambition in this plan. Because we're hearing that this is the biggest investment in yonks. Alan Kelly used to tell us the same over there. This would not even bring us to the 2007 levels of building. And yet we now have, as we know, a housing waiting lists of a multiple of that. In 2007 and 2008, the bar charts are there in your own report. You can go and look at them. we were building about 5,000 local authority or housing association houses, and acquisitions and Part 5s were pretty much at 9,000. That's your plan, 9,000 houses a year for social housing. An incredible paucity of ambition at a time when leprechaun economics tell us that we have massive growth rates in this country. Also, the poverty of ambition in relation to the 200,000 vacant houses. My reading of it is that 1,600 is to be acquired. Maybe you could clarify that. But local authorities are to be ordered by you now to hand over land to private developers to develop it for trickle-down housing that they might get off them, to the order of 25 to 30% is indicated. And why? Because we have to follow. Even though we have the land, we have the money, because the Taoiseach himself, the Minister for Finance has told us there's no shortage of money. We've got 5.4 billion, the deputy behind you was asking, sitting in the Strategic Investment Fund. We could use that for the provision of public housing, but we're barred by EU fiscal rules. And Minister, have you done one thing to ask the EU for a derogation because of our housing emergency? Have you made any communication to Brussels on the matter whatsoever? You've been well aware that this is the case. Instead, we read in your report that, scandalously, the Department has spent 2 years, while the housing crisis has been raging, trying to find a workable off-balance sheet model to get around this quandary. So it is very simple. We have the land, we certainly have the labour, we've many unemployed building workers, we have the money, but we are not allowed to do it publicly. It has to involve the private sector and it has to be self-financing. It's capitalism, it's the neoliberal impediment that's preventing us resolving our housing crisis. So I just wanted to deal with the ISIF fund of 5.4 billion and the NAMA fund of 2.4 billion cash reserves. That's 8 billion that we could be spending on social and affordable housing. And yet the state cannot use that to build housing. This is the problem we have. Let's simplify it, because you're announcing about 10 different schemes today, but that is the problem. And it's absolutely outrageous. Now, you've announced today as well a new type of housing estate. The term mixed tenure has been used. Like the term mixed tenure, it's like motherhood and apple pie. Everyone is in favour of diversity. You know, we all want to be different mix of people. But the Minister is constantly interrupting.
Well,
you can't help
you're
yourself.
asking questions as well. Could I just simply say there's a certain allocation of time here, and people are going to keep interrupting.
Well, can you add on a bit for the
interrupting with people who want to contribute.
25% to 30% will be social housing. This is on public council-owned land. And 75% will be people on private mortgages, or this new term, affordable rental. What is affordable rental? It's 70 to 80%, maybe you'll clarify, of the market rent. Now, so if you live in Dunleary, 80% of 18 or 2,000, which is what's being paid in many parts of Dublin, it's still 12, 13, 1,400. That's not an affordable rent. The idea that we would call that affordable is laughable. The people in Tyrrellstown, who live in houses, by the way, not apartments, are paying €1,500 for very small houses. An affordable rent under your scheme for them would still be it's not an affordable rent, Minister. We need to raise the eligibility for social housing so that people like bus workers, etc., can apply for it, but we also need to provide people with affordable mortgages. Schemes like the council did. I have an affordable mortgage with Fingal County Council from when I was a teacher 12 years ago. That allowed me access a house, give other people that same opportunity. I had an email last night from a family whose rent is going up by €100. Now, that wouldn't be a lot to you, but for this family, their monthly income is €1,700. They're working. There's 5 of them, 3 children and 2 parents. They live in a 2-bed, and their rent is going up to €1,200. So they'll have to live on €600, those 5 people, for a month. Have you anything in the plan for them? Not one solution at all. What we need is emergency legislation to ban repossessions, something that at least the Housing Committee did ask for, a moratorium on repossessions, and you haven't done it. To ban evictions, you haven't. How many months do you need to be aware that it's obvious that we need rent controls? that the private rented sector is the source of homelessness and the source of poverty, and yet you're planning on entrusting 65% of the social housing provision in the state still to the private rented sector. A hugely expensive way of providing social housing. We need to, just finishing now, Ciarán, we need to return to using public land, public funds and building a range of affordable and social housing for people to buy or rent.
Thank you, Margaret. I now call on Deputy Maureen O'Sullivan. Are you sharing with Deputy Calvin Connolly and Deputy McWallace?
Yeah, so
15
minutes
between you, 5 minutes each, that's fine.
Okay.
And,